One book, though not a massive bestseller, is revered in tech circles as the origin scripture of the digital era, Turing's Cathedral. Why does a book about clunky computers from the 1940s and 1950s keep getting reread by Silicon Valley titans? What secret does it hold that lets us see the faint outlines of today's smartphones, AI, and the internet emerging from the smoke of nuclear calculations? Today, let's step inside the Turing Cathedral described by George Dyson and follow the footsteps of a group of geniuses to discover how the digital universe exploded out of a small building in Princeton. Chapter 1: The chance encounter in 1945 that lit the spark of the digital age. World War II had just ended, and the world still lay under the shadow of the atomic bomb. In the summer of 1945, Hungarian-born mathematical genius John von Neumann was at Los Alamos working on the Manhattan Project and personally witnessed how enormous the computational demands were for building an atomic bomb. Thousands upon thousands of manual calculations where a single error could mean failure. He realized that future weapons would no longer be won by human muscle, but by computation. What did computation look like back then? Picture dozens of young people sitting at long tables holding slide rules and logarithm tables, repeatedly performing multiplications and divisions, while stacks of paper grew like little mountains and sweat dripped onto the sheets, blurring the numbers. Von Neumann watched these scenes every day and grew more and more restless inside. He was a mathematician, yet he deeply understood that mathematics confined to paper had never reached the limits of reality. Just at that moment, he came across the report on the NIAC. The NIAC was the first electronic computer built by the U.S. military, but it had a fatal flaw. Every time you wanted to solve a different problem, you had to rewire the entire machine for days, like rewiring a gigantic telephone exchange. Engineers had to climb up and down, connecting thousands of vacuum tubes with patch cables, and the slightest mistake would bring the whole beast to a halt. A bold idea flashed through von Neumann's mind. Could the machine read instructions the same way it reads data? That thought came directly from a paper written several years earlier by British mathematician Alan Turing. In 1936, at the age of only 20, for Turing in a quiet Cambridge study used pencil and scrap paper to sketch the most profound abstract machine in human history. He never imagined that this idea would 10 years later travel from a desert laboratory across the Atlantic to an ivory tower in Princeton. Von Neumann turned that abstract theory into a concrete blueprint. At the end of 1945, he wrote the first draft of a report on the Advaca document circulated without his full name that became the Constitution of modern computer architecture, the stored program concept where instructions and data reside in the same memory, ready to be fetched at any time. The report spread quickly and instantly ignited the passion of engineers around the world. From Turing in Britain to von Neumann's team in America, and later to IBM and the Manchester machine, everyone raced to build the stored program computer. But von Neumann chose neither a military factory nor an industrial lab. He chose the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. This place was originally a paradise for pure theory where Einstein and Dell worked, yet suddenly they were about to build a monster machine. The mathematicians erupted. We study the truths of the universe. How can we stoop to engineering? Von Neumann replied, computation is merely an extension of truth. Without computation, theory will forever remain trapped on paper. He even personally went to military offices to fight for funding, speaking with the firmness of someone declaring war. If we do not build this machine, we will lose the next war. During that period, von Neumann lived a double life: by day at Los Alamos discussing fission chain reactions with Oppenheimer and Fermi, by night back in Princeton buried in the evac report. He often worked through the night until his wife Clara would get up to drape a blanket over him, only to find the desk covered in drafts densely filled with words that are commonplace today: storage address, instruction cycle. Once he told Clara, if we succeed, humanity will for the first time possess an intellectual tool that can expand without limit. It will never tire, it will never make emotional mistakes, it will only become faster and more accurate. Clara half-jokingly asked, will it one day become smarter than you? Von Neumann was silent for a moment, then answered, perhaps, but that is not the point. The point is that it will let humanity truly understand for the first time what infinity really means. That report later became known as one of the most influential documents in computing history, yet because of wartime secrecy, it did not circulate widely until 1946. During its spread, people secretly copied it, others hand-copied several versions and mailed them to colleagues in Europe. Within a few short months, Turing in Britain, Eckert and Maudsley in America, and others in France were all reading this slim draft. It acted like an intellectual atomic bomb, quietly detonating across global academic and military engineering circles. In the spring of 1946, the Institute approved the project. Von Neumann began recruiting. The first team members were precisely those young people who had proven their computational skill during the war. Among them were physicists from Harvard, electronics experts who jumped from Bell Labs, and several recently demobilized Navy codebreakers. When they first gathered, the opening question was often the same: are we really going to build a machine that can think here? Von Neumann smiled and answered, not think, compute. But when computation reaches its extreme, who can clearly draw the boundary? Chapter 2: The Traitor Project at the Institute. Von Neumann's Great Gamble. The Institute for Advanced Study was founded in 1930 by educator Abraham Flexner with the goal of being a heaven for pure research, no teaching, no pressure. Einstein spent his later years here strolling and pondering extensions of relativity. Dell proved his incompleteness theorems here, plunging the entire mathematical world into philosophical reflection. Suddenly, a group of engineers arrived carrying soldering irons and oscilloscopes. Mathematicians whispered among themselves, will these people turn the Institute into a factory? Von Neumann brought in Julian Bigelow as chief engineer. Bigelow, who originally came from a mechanical background, had an astonishing intuition. He insisted on describing circuit states with flip-flops rather than triggers, because the former was more reliable. States were clear and would not confuse 0 and 1 due to faults. That small decision later became the gold standard for digital circuits. The team began building the machine in 1946 with funding from the military and the Rockefeller Foundation, but opposition never stopped. Oppenheimer himself hesitated at one point with building a computer in the purity of the Institute. Von Neumann convinced everyone with two arguments. The hydrogen bomb design required simulation of the explosion process, which was impossible by hand. Only a computer could do it. He told the military, "Give us the computer and we will give you the hydrogen bomb." Second, he stressed its universality. This machine would not only calculate bombs, it could also model weather, evolution, and economics. He even wrote to a friend, "If we can build a machine capable of simulating any mathematical process, we will not be far from God's point of view." By 1948, a prototype emerged named MANIAC, though privately people called it the von Neumann machine. Its core consisted of 40 Williams tubes, each storing 10 or 40-bit words for a total memory of about 5 kilobytes. Today, the memory used just to boot a phone is thousands of times larger, yet back then 5 kilobytes was already a miracle. The Williams tube was actually a modified cathode ray tube, and the electron beam created bright spots on the screen for 1 and dark spots for 0. Engineers stared at the flickering screen every day as though reading an ancient star chart. During one debugging session, the screen suddenly went completely black. Bigelow broke into a sweat only to discover a loose power cable. He joked, "This machine is even more temperamental than my wife. One wrong touch and she gets angry." Von Neumann laughed. "Then we must coax it the way we coax a child." These little incidents added a touch of humanity to the cold engineering. The opposition faction at the Institute gradually fell silent because they saw that every time the machine ran successfully, von Neumann would open champagne for everyone to celebrate. He believed science is not solitary meditation, but collective ecstasy. That collective ecstasy sometimes carried absurd comedic flavor. Once the philosopher Dell passed by the machine room, saw the flashing cathode ray tubes, stopped and stared for a long time, then seriously asked Bigelow, "These points of light, is it possible they're dreaming?" Bigelow was stunned and did not know how to answer a question from a master of logic. Finally, he scratched his head and said, "If they are dreaming, the content of the dream is probably an infinite number of 0 south and 1 south dancing." Dell nodded and walked away. A few days later, when von Neumann heard the story, he burst out laughing. Gödel's question is the truly ultimate question. What we are building is not a machine, it is the embryonic form of a universe that can dream. These seemingly casual conversations actually reflected the deepest anxiety and excitement of that era. Humanity was personally creating a brand new form of existence. It was both a tool and possibly a mirror reflecting our own most secret desires. Chapter 3. From nuclear explosion simulation to weather forecasting. When computation first came alive, in 1950, MANIAC officially came online. Its first major task was hydrogen bomb simulation. Stanisław Ulam and von Neumann used the Monte Carlo method, random sampling, to model particle collisions. Before this, people literally threw dice by hand to simulate. Now the machine threw thousands of them per second. Ulam later recalled, "We watched the numbers dance across the paper tape like watching a slow-motion replay of the Big Bang." The results stunned the world. The feasibility of the hydrogen bomb jumped dramatically. But von Neumann did not stop at weapons. He turned next to weather. In 1950, he had the Joule Charney team run the first numerical weather prediction on MANIAC. The meteorological equations were terrifyingly complex. Coupled fluid dynamics and thermodynamics, nonlinear equations everywhere. The machine ran for days and finally spat out a rough but meaningful forecast map. It showed a low-pressure system over the North Atlantic moving eastward, bringing heavy rain to Britain. And the real weather actually followed that pattern. Von Neumann was thrilled. For the first time, we used a machine to predict the future. This was more than weather forecasting. It was the embryo of the digital twin, the real world mirrored in code. From that day, meteorologists began to believe that computation could see the birth of a storm earlier than any human. The success of numerical weather prediction also let von Neumann glimpse something much farther. He started dreaming of a global computing network. If multiple computers could connect and exchange data in real time, humanity could predict typhoon paths, floods, and even economic swings days or weeks ahead. In 1952, he wrote in a letter, "Future weather forecasts will no longer be guesses, but precise calculations. Future wars will no longer be blind slaughter, but contests of computational resources." He did not live to see the internet, but his thinking already foreshadowed today's climate models, satellite data assimilation, and large model predictions of extreme weather. When you open your phone today and see heavy rain tomorrow, bring an umbrella. You are using a legacy left by that 5 kilobytes machine half a century earlier. Around the same time, Niels Bohr's used the machine to run digital life experiments. He designed simple rules, numbers behaving like cells, reproducing, mutating, competing. After hundreds of iterations, species appeared on the screen, evolving, parasitizing, cooperating. One digital parasite even learned it to steal its neighbor's energy to reproduce itself. Bohr exclaimed, "This is not simulation, this is real evolution." When von Neumann heard this, he fell into deep thought. Could code come alive on its own? He began writing notes exploring self-reproducing automata. He said, If a machine can copy itself, then it possesses the most basic characteristic of life. Those ideas later directly inspired computer simulations of DNA's double helix and foreshadowed today's evolutionary algorithms and genetic programming. MANIAC's lights burned all night like an everlasting lighthouse, illuminating the path from nuclear winter to digital spring. Chapter 4: Turing's Shadow, the leap from one-dimensional to two-dimensional universal machine. Why is the book called Turing's Cathedral? Because everything traces back to Turing's 1936 paper on computable numbers with an application to the Untitled. Turing imagined a machine, an infinite tape, a read-write head, a finite state table. Feed it a program plus data, and the machine could compute anything that is computable. This was the universal Turing machine, the theoretical ancestor of every modern computer. But Turing's model was one-dimensional. The tape moved linearly like an endless conveyor belt. Von Neumann turned it into 2 dimensions. Memory became a matrix with random access addresses. That seemingly small change transformed the machine from reading a tape to residing in a brain. Code was no longer an external instruction. It became part of memory, indistinguishable from data. This broke the boundary between digital representation and digital operation. Von Neumann said, "We have created a language that God can read and write." In his later years, Turing himself turned to similar questions. In 1950, he proposed the Turing test: can machines think? He designed a simple game. A human converses via typewriter with a machine. If you cannot tell who is human and who is machine, the machine passes. But he never saw his theory take physical form. In 1954, he died tragically at 41 after chemical castration. When MANIAC ran, Turing was already gone, yet his universal machine had been resurrected in Princeton. Dyson writes in the book, Turing's paper was a seed. Von Neumann planted it in real soil, and it grew into a cathedral. This cathedral had no spires or stained glass, only flickering vacuum tubes and humming fans. What it worshipped was not God, but the new faith of computability. Ordinary people may not understand the Turing machine, but every time they scroll videos, navigate maps, or chat, they are using Turing's legacy. When you ask an AI a question, what runs behind it is a modern version of the universal Turing machine. Turing used pencil and paper to prove the boundaries of computation. Von Neumann used soldering irons to break through those boundaries. Together, one ahead, one behind, they laid the foundation stones of the digital universe. Turing and von Neumann actually met very little, only once briefly at a conference in London in 1947. According to recollections, Turing was very interested in von Neumann's stored program idea, but asked a sharp question: if instructions and data share the same space, won't there be a danger of self-modification? Von Neumann replied at the time, "The danger exists, but the opportunity is greater. We must learn to live with that danger." That exchange is now seen by many as prophetic. It points directly to today's problems of AI alignment, safety, and code that evolves itself. Turing proved the mathematical limits of computation. Von Neumann broke through those limits with engineering. Their ideas were like two parallel lines that briefly intersected in the 1950s and stretched separately into the future, one toward the philosophical frontier of artificial intelligence, the other toward the real world, the empire of Silicon Valley. Chapter 5: The Clash Between Engineers and Mathematicians. Who is the true master? The process of building the machine was full of tension. Mathematicians looked down on engineers. You people only know how to solder tubes. Engineers shot back. Without us, your theories will forever remain ink on paper. Julian Bigelow later recalled, once during an argument, a mathematician said this is impossible, and the next day the engineer had already soldered together a working prototype. The mathematician stood in front of the machine the next morning holding a coffee cup and was silent for a long time before finally saying, "Okay, you win." Von Neumann mediated from the middle, but he clearly leaned toward the engineers. He knew that for theory to land in reality, hardware must be respected. Interesting detail. Post-war material shortages meant the team had to scrounge for sugar and metal tubes alike. Once von Neumann crashed his car into a tree, got banged up, but laughed and said at least it didn't delay the schedule. His wife Clara von Neumann joined the project and became one of the earliest female programmers. She debugged code late into the night, often saying the machine is like a child, you have to coax it. One time the program went into an infinite loop. Clara went 3 days without sleep and finally found the bug, a misplaced parenthesis. She threw coffee on the keyboard and shouted, "Got you at last." The whole team applauded like it was a holiday. These small stories gave the cold machine a human warmth. Another key figure was Arthur Burks, who handled the logical design. Burks later recalled, "We weren't building a machine, we were building a new way of thinking." They often discussed late at night, what happens if the machine can modify its own program? Von Neumann said, then it stops being a tool and becomes a partner. The engineers were more practical. First, let's make sure it doesn't catch fire. This collision was actually one of the greatest fusions in human history. Abstract and concrete, dream and reality, mathematics and engineering. Without either side, the other could not go far. Today's large model training faces exactly the same tension. Theorists design algorithms, engineers optimize GPUs and cooling. History is repeating itself, only the stage is bigger and there are more players. This tension between mathematicians and engineers has actually run through the entire digital era. In the 1960s, Claude Shannon and Turing Award winners at Bell Labs were still arguing whether information theory was truly science. In the 1970s, the graphical interface team at Xerox PARC was mocked by traditional computer scientists as too flashy. In the 1990s, the Netscape Microsoft browser war saw engineers win with products, while mathematicians provided algorithms in the background. The large model era today is no different. The authors of the Transformer paper were mathematicians and physicists, but the people who pushed ChatGPT to hundreds of millions of users or countless engineers working day and night on distributed training, latency reduction, and GPU cluster debugging. Without collision, there is no progress. The role von Neumann played at the Institute back then was actually very similar to today's product manager plus chief scientist. He understood theory, understood people could convince Oppenheimer to release funds, and could keep Bigelow working overtime without complaint. His early death left many people sighing. If he had lived to 70, would digital history have been completely different? Chapter 6. The first explosion of the digital universe. From 5 kilobytes to everything connected. In 1958, MANIAC was retired, but its design was copied everywhere. Manchester Machine, Iliac, Johnniac, and more sprang up around the world. Von Neumann died of cancer in 1957 at only 53. On his deathbed, he told Stanislaw Ulam, "We opened a Pandora's box, but it might also be a new Eden." Looking back today, a machine with 5 kilobytes of memory gave birth to 3 big things. First, code self-replication. Darwin's experiments foreshadowed computer viruses and AI evolution. Second, simulation of complex systems, from nuclear explosions to climate to today's large model training. Third, human-machine fusion. We no longer use machines, we live inside code. The chip architecture in your smartphone internet protocols, the neural networks of ChatGPT can all trace their lineage back to that little room at the Institute. Think about it. The von Neumann architecture computer you use every day is still executing that 1945 idea of the stored program. From TikTok recommendation algorithms to autonomous driving path planning to gene editing simulations, none of it escapes this starting point. Dyson writes in the book, "The digital universe was not invented, it was discovered, just like Copernicus discovered that the Earth orbits the Sun. Humanity is merely the first species to realize this universe exists. And the people at the Institute were the earliest explorers. With very limited resources, they opened an infinite door. Ordinary people may feel these things are far away, but every time you use a search engine to find an answer, use a map to avoid traffic, or use AI to write an email, you are actually conversing with that cathedral. It has not disappeared, it has simply become the air everywhere. What is even more poignant is that most of the builders of this cathedral died young. Von Neumann died at 53 of cancer, Turing at 41, Baricelli spent his later years in poverty, Bigelow faded from public view early. They were like people who lit the kindling, but did not live to see the roaring fire. Yet the spark has spread across the globe. From the baby at Manchester University to IBM 701, from Apple Macintosh to today's attempts at quantum computing, every generation of computer people is unconsciously continuing the story of the Institute. Dyson uses a metaphor in the book. The MANIAC at the Institute was like the first Gothic cathedral of the Middle Ages, crude, drafty, often collapsing, but it was the first structure that made people look up and see the possibility of infinite height. Every skyscraper, every chip, every app that came afterward is a tribute and an extension of that original cathedral. Chapter 7. How should ordinary people face this digital cathedral? This book has a strong academic flavor, but it carries huge meaning for ordinary people. It tells us the digital era did not arrive suddenly. It was built between 1945 and 1957 by a group of people using mathematics and soldering irons. Today, as AI sweeps in, some people fear losing jobs, others cheer liberation. Von Neumann's team back then also will machines replace humans? The answer is, they will not replace us, but they will reshape the division of labor. Just as weather forecasting went from manual to machine programming, today is going from manual to AI-assisted. The key is, take the initiative to learn computational thinking. You do not need to become an expert, but understanding a little if-then logic will let you collaborate better with machines. For example, when writing prompts, treat it like writing a program, clear, precise, well-bounded. When facing massive information, use something like the Monte Carlo method. Sample many times, verify many times, never trust a single source. You can also apply this thinking in daily life. Want to lose weight? Don't just look at one or two success stories. Statistically analyze a large amount of data and find the patterns that really work. Considering a career change, don't rely only on feeling. Run multiple life scenarios like simulating a hydrogen bomb and evaluate the probabilities. Von Neumann's legacy is not a machine, it is a way of looking at the world. Break complex problems into small computable pieces and conquer them one by one. Of course, we must also stay vigilant about risks. Back then they built computers to win wars. Today, we use AI to win efficiency, life, attention. But once Pandora's box is opened, it cannot be closed. So ethics and boundaries matter even more. Can we make machines serve humanity instead of the other way around? Dyson writes at the end, the cathedral has already been built. We are both the choir inside it and the architects. Ordinary people do not need to understand qubits or neural networks, but you can ask yourself 3 questions. Am I using technology, or is technology using me? Am I creating or just consuming? Am I connecting to the world or isolating myself? Different answers lead to different life paths. Finally, remember one sentence from von Neumann. Technology itself has no good or evil. The key is what we do with it. The digital universe has already exploded. We are both its residents and its builders. Do not be afraid. Walk into this cathedral and light the lamp that belongs to you. Perhaps one day a piece of code you write, a deeper prop you design, a small decision you make will become the next chance encounter spark. For ordinary people, the biggest inspiration from this book may be, great changes are never accomplished by superhumans, but by a group of ordinary geniuses who stubbornly pushed forward with limited resources. Von Neumann was not a god. He also got tired, argued, and worried about budgets. Turing was not a perfect prophet. He suffered prejudice and pain his whole life. They were simply people who saw the possibility earlier than others, and then gave everything to make it real. Today, every one of us stands on the shoulders of giants. You do not need to be a mathematical genius. You do not need military connections. As long as you are willing to spend a little time understanding, if then trying to with machines, thinking what real problem can this tool help me solve, you are already participating in the next round of expansion of this cathedral. Because the digital universe is not closed, it is open, it is co-created. Every time you use AI to generate an image, write an email, analyze data, you are adding bricks and tiles to it. So do not just be a consumer, try also to become a builder. Even if it is just writing a simple line of Python, even if it is just asking AI a more thoughtful question, that is still continuing the spark from that summer of 1945. The door of the cathedral is always open, waiting for every curious person to walk in. Because history tells us the greatest changes often began in the quietest rooms.